Thank you very much and good evening, everyone. I'll start the meeting, first of all, with apologies.
Chair, we haven't received any apologies for absence.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest?
Chair, just on when we're talking about polling stations, in Burntwood, St Jason, St Teresa's will come up. I work there and the children go there, so obviously I might be, yay, keep them in school.
Right. Thank you for that. Minutes of the previous meeting, you've all received those, because someone please move them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm all happy, thank you for sign. Right, item 4, polling places, local elections 2023. I think this is where we bring Christy in, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as the report states, when we do an election, we have to consider the places that we're going to use. And we've had some movement over the last couple of years due to COVID. And obviously this has changed somewhat people's expectations about where we can use polling stations and also what are fit for purpose in terms of the stations that are available to us. One thing we can't avoid is that we do have to do an election in May. That date is set. There is nothing we can do to change that. It's just where we can cite those elections to be most suitable, to be accessible to all of the voters who need to cast their votes on the day, and ensure that we comply with the new regulations that have been brought about by the new Elections Act. They specifically relate to issues around accessibility, and we're having to review all of our accessibility plans for the stations. The requirements are much tighter than they've been previously. You'll be aware that we do undertake a health and safety risk assessment of every site to ensure that we have suitable access ramps, that there is suitable space for people to rest if they've walked a distance to actually get to the station. There are new requirements as well, and I'll be undertaking some consultation with local groups at the end of this month to ensure that we've covered off all of those specific requirements for everybody's needs. The things that are being considered at the moment are things that I've mentioned in the report about things like finger grips to enable people to hold the pencils more closely. The fact that the regulations have changed around who can accompany them, so that's a lot more relaxed than it's been previously, to ensure that every voter has the support that they need to cast their votes appropriately. The main focus of this report, though, you'll see from the appendix, is about the locations we intend to use in order to provide the polling stations. So there's a lot of things that need to happen between now and the actual date of elections. The notice of election is due to be called around the 20th of March, where we'll start taking nominations. And you'll see from the last set of district and parish elections, I've highlighted in the body of the appendix those that are potentially not going to be suitable or not going to be needed, sorry, as a result of potentially candidates not necessarily standing in those areas. They're not being a poll to contest. Obviously, we've no prediction of that, but I've indicated on the report those that may not come about as a result of there not being sufficient candidates to stand in those locations. The other issues in the last 2 years, because of COVID and the disruption that the schools have faced, we have tried wherever possible to avoid using schools. However, there are several locations where that is, unfortunately, because of the composition of the area and the available spaces, where it is unavoidable, and those have been highlighted. There were a couple of requests that we've included within the report for alternative locations to schools. And unfortunately, we have had some responses back from those alternative locations that we would have preferred to use instead of the schools, that have told us that they aren't available on the day of the elections. So unfortunately, it may be that we do have to revert back to those school locations. So just in terms of if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, but really this is an opportunity for members to be aware of where we will potentially be calling for those services to be available. As I say, they've all been written to, they've all been contacted, and they are slowly responding, but you'll appreciate we need to be able to have the flexibility to have these sites available to us. And if they can't accommodate us, then we do have to find an alternative. We cannot not have a polling location.
Thanks, Christy. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention that I should have declared an interest in Chase Terrace Primary School as I'm Chair of Governors there. But also, I know that Chase Terrace has to be used because there is no alternative near. And I did negotiate with the head quite a few years ago now to only have the nursery area shut off, so the rest of the school will be as normal, which I'm pleased about, because before it was quite a disruption to have the whole school closed. Regarding Boney Primary Academy, I noticed, and I just listened to what we've been told, that Boney Working Men's Club, I assume, were not available at the time. But again, can I ask, is there an area that is cut off from that academy, or do they have to close the whole school? Because it is a great shame when schools have to be closed, particularly in the climate that we are in at the moment, and the fact that there's been COVID and the schools have been closed for a long time. And of course, teachers are now on strike. Not that I'm against that at all, but it is meaning that children's education is disrupted quite considerably, and that is of concern, I'm sure, to people who have got polling stations in their area that are still in the school. But as I said about Chase Terrace, I recognise that there is no alternative around there, because I have looked before on the advice of officers from here, but it just is impossible.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to say the officers have worked hard looking for alternative venues, and there's nothing there. And as we pointed out, we have to have the election on that date in those venues. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Byrne.
Yeah, first of all, apologies for my lateness. I was in the building. I was downstairs in the tech department. So apologies. Yes, I am aware that, if you want to vote, you have to show some form of identification. Now, I know that, but I'm also assured that it's been advertised in the press. Well, I have a newspaper every day, and I haven't seen any official notice that states that is what you have to do. And I think there is some confusion over these identity certificates as well, or there will be some confusion. So the question is the council likely to be sending out posters or information that can go in the villages, on the notice boards, well, anywhere, so that everybody, as far as possible, is made aware of the changes?
Well, Christy, so I do know, I've seen quite a few things about
Yes,
Christy, you can update us.
Yeah, obviously there's a national campaign which went live at the end of January, which includes adverts on BBC as well as ITV and on all platforms in terms of social media and internet. There is a poster campaign that's being done nationally as well, and that does feature adverts in the national press, and that's been organised by central government. In terms of what we're doing as an authority, we're including a leaflet with the council tax letters that go out this year, so every household will get a formal notification through that process. In addition, we've also had some paid advertising that we're doing through the free free delivery papers, which covers 11,000 households. We're also having printed a number of A5 leaflets that will be available and we'll be dispatching to parish clerks and available to members to have as well to distribute locally if they feel there's an issue in their area. We're also undertaking some work with the Joint Waste team to deliver, in particular, leaflets to those properties that require special assistance, to ensure that those people who are perhaps less likely to be on social media platforms where this advert is running regularly, so that they're made aware of the changes as well directly to reinforce the message. We're also had some access to some other parish council newsletters as well. So we've sent the copy, or we'll be sending the copy very shortly, to the parish clerks to include in the latest round of newsletters. So in terms of coverage, overview and scrutiny have been really helpful and thorough in their review of that, and I'll be reporting to them as well at the next committee to state what we've done so far. We have had to discount the bin tags, which was suggested, just because on the basis of the costs and the timeliness of that, because it takes us about 2 weeks to get that out, and it costs us about £5,000 in officer time to actually undertake that on top of the normal productivity of the Joint Waste Service, in addition to about that much cost in terms of printing those tags. So that's quite an intensive thing, and unfortunately we just don't have the budget to be able to do that, because we can't claim that back from the government as part of the new burdens. But I think in package, in terms of reinforcing the message, the poll cards that go out as well for this election, which will be hitting the doormats a few weeks before the election, will also very clearly have a striking tab across the top that says, don't forget you need to bring your ID, and the acceptable forms are. The key dates we need to remind people of, though, is that if they don't have a suitable form of ID, they do have to apply by the 25th of April to ensure that they have the voter certificate. It's completely free. It's available online. The links are in the previous presentations, and I'll circulate those to members as well. But they can go and get that if they're at all unsure about their current ID. And in addition, if there are any concerns, they can still obtain a proxy vote up until the 5 p.m. deadline on the day of the election, if they haven't already considered or discounted whether or not they want to apply for a postal vote, because the ID requirements don't apply to postal votes at this election. They will in future elections, but not for the next one.
That's reassuring. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Tilby, you want to do that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think I'm right in saying there's a good move in respect of fewer mobile stations this time. I think I've counted 4 definites and a couple where they may be used if another venue can't be found. That's a good cost saving there. Well done on that one. From the perspective of the candidates, do we have dates? I know it's 4 o'clock on the 4th of the 4th for getting our notice of intent in by, but do we have a date yet when we can actually obtain our notice of intent paperwork to fill in?
So at the moment, the intention is that will go live on the 20th of March. So we'll have a more than 2 week window for members to come forward. Obviously, in the district and parish, we can have around 500 applicants or 500 nomination forms that come through. So we do need to allow time for everybody to get an appointment to come and see us.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, when will electoral registers be available, either in print or PDF?
My colleague in the project plan has got that to begin next week, so those should be coming through fairly rapidly now.
Yeah, thank you, and yeah, thanks for your response, because we've liaised around about photo ID, because I think it's a really important issue for all of us. Just a couple of points. One point with the advertising, it's really important. I think it's rolling. I'm sure it will be, because people won't catch it the first time, so it's very important that people are reminded about this. And 2 other questions on that. One, the resource for the certificates, and also the increase in postal votes, which I'm sure there will be. If you could just report back on what the council's doing there, and also the resource at the polling stations, because there's going to be more checks that are going to need to be done with the photo ID. What's the can you just report back and reassure the meeting on that, please? Thank you.
Obviously, this election is going to be a little bit different to previous ones. In terms of the voter certificate, that's been picked up by the governance team. So we've got several officers who are accessing the system. It's a fairly light touch process. So we're just basically approving the photos and dealing with any anomalies if people don't have the right national insurance number access to hand or aren't already registered on there. We've had really good support from our customer services team. So they've all been trained as well to be able to do that. And they are trained and ready. If people can't access those systems online themselves, they will accept appointments for people to come in and have their picture taken and for them to talk them through the process and do it on their behalf. So if people are concerned at all and worried about using the internet, then they can book an appointment with a customer service advisor and they will talk them through that. So we've allowed for that, and we've had New Burdings funding, which has funded a post that will go specifically into the customer services team to alleviate that pressure, because as you appreciate, this time of year is very busy anyway in terms of annual billing and all of our normal cycles of work. In terms of the postal votes, we've not seen a massive uptick yet. We have had quite an increase over the last succession of elections because of obviously COVID restrictions and people being concerned about that. So we have a relatively high number of postal votes already. We're not seeing a huge transition, but obviously there's still time for that to change. But our resourcing plans are fairly flexible, and we know that we're adding in an additional contingency to allow for any last minute splurge or last minute rush on those issues. In terms of the polling stations, we've been advised to staff up wherever possible in terms of additional clerks and allow for meeters and greeters to be able to do that first check with people as they're coming through the door. Have you remembered your ID? Or and there will be signage as well in the lead up to the polling stations, just to remind people if they've already sort of got that far, or you need your ID to vote. Don't try and come in unless you've actually got it, because you're just going to be sent away to go home and get it. So those reminders will be there, and that make sure that we've got people who are sufficiently trained. So we've allowed additional training for the people who are going to be doing that task. We've also allowed for additional what we call polling supervisors or polling inspectors, people may know them as. So we will be doubling up basically on those. We would normally have a polling inspector for every 10 stations. We're aiming to have one for every 5. So if there are issues, we've got that HIT team who can go and readjust where people are deployed. So if you've got a station that's very, very quiet and not having many issues, then we can redeploy the staff throughout the day and make those dynamic decisions, and some element of contingency as well, because we do suspect that when we start training our polling staff, that particularly the presiding officers are the ones who are going to be the ones to ask people for their ID and tell them, unfortunately, if they can't vote, if it's not suitable, doesn't meet the criteria, then we suspect that a couple of them may actually say, actually, I don't feel comfortable doing it. I'd rather just be a poll clerk on this occasion and not that have additional responsibility. So we are building in those contingencies into our recruitment plan to make sure we've got additional capacity to draw on.
So when you go to vote, will there be 2 checks? Will you go to the polling clerk first and get your name ticked off the register, and then you go on to have your photo ID? Is that how it will work?
In essence, yeah, you have to do your normal presentation in terms of make sure that you're actually on the register. So that's the first check, and then in terms of being able to confirm that you have appropriate ID to prove that you are who you say you are, and that's sort of the second check. There are additional paperwork that the polling staff will have to do, unfortunately, on this occasion, because the government wants us to record who presents and any reasons why they are turned away, to be able to assess how effectively the rollout's been and what the take-up has been on the day. So there are some additional responsibilities that the presiding officer and the poll clerk will have on the day in terms of filling in paperwork, both as people are coming in and they're being assessed and either refused or sent home to get the appropriate ID, and they'll need to record that and report it at the end of the day, because we will have to report that to government at the end of the election. So there are some complications. We're having to do some big flow charts that will be on the table that say, if it's this, do that, and if it's that, do this, because with best will in the world, we will be training these people, but training them and actually going through those exercises when somebody stood in front of you, you do need to potentially have that flow to make sure you're making the right decision. And as I say, the additional support and capacity by those polling supervisors to pull on to actually give them the confidence and support to make the right decisions on the day.
Yeah. And so can I just
So when somebody's having the ID checked, do you think that's going to be quite a quick process? 'Cause you were saying there's some other information that's got to be collated. Is that just sort of behind the scenes sort of thing? Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah, that won't affect the customer. Basically, what the presiding officer and the poll clerk will be looking is to make sure that it's one of the valid criteria ID. So that's a passport. It doesn't have to be in date as long as the picture still looks like you. A driver's license again doesn't have to be in date as long as the picture looks like you. The pass scheme, so the over 18 type cards that a lot of places have, bus passes, so local government issued bus passes are perfectly fine as well, and then things like visa registration, Commonwealth passports and EU passports are valid as well. So there's a whole list, and again there'll be a primer that will be available to the staff to say it's one of these, and if there are any questions then they can call on the polling supervisor or the RO as required to make a final decision. Obviously we don't want to prevent anybody from voting who has the right form of ID, but obviously we've got to comply with the new legislation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the polling station list here, Chrissy. You've got Foley Park Community Hall down. In previous years, we've had 2 mobile units there for RA, RB and RC. Is this going to carry on? They're not going to carry on, or will they all be stationed in the community hall at Foley Park? They will all be in the Foley Park Hall. Oh, right, that's good. Because it was going to be a bit difficult with the mobile units if people are going to stand around producing documents. So, that's fine. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Yeah, just a few on, obviously, Burntwood in Chasetown, we're looking at maybe moving some to the leisure centre. Do we know if that's actually happening? Because obviously at some point, it's one of them's going to have to move because Cherry Close won't be there. So I don't know if that's been confirmed or not yet.
Well, obviously members will be aware that we are taking back control of the leisure centre, so it will be entirely in our control by that point. And yes, we have used that for the last few elections in preference to St Joseph and St Teresa's, because obviously we've done everything we can to avoid using schools wherever possible. So that's worked reasonably well, and the studio is more than large enough to accommodate the numbers that are there. So we're confident on that location.
Just another quick one. Obviously, it does sound that polling cards where it's at. I will say that St Joseph still have people that come to that school every polling going, oh, and they're like, it's not here. So I know it's on the polling card, but is there any way to maybe push it out a bit more that it has changed now to Burntwood Leisure Centre?
Yeah, obviously from as a result of this, and once we get confirmation from all of the venues, which we're hoping to have within the next week or so, because obviously we need to get the poll cards printed to get them out by the end of the month. Yeah, we will be firming that up, and we'll be writing out, and we'll be doing some press around that as well. We normally publish on our website all of the stations that we're going to use and highlight any changes, and we push that out on our social media and our email. Similarly, we've got all the contacts for the parish councils and things like that, so we can send relevant details to those locations and areas and the town councils, so that we've covered as much as we can in terms of letting people know. And on the day, we generally, if there has been a change, we will ensure that there's a poster or something that's clear there to say this is where it has moved to. So that's something that the presiding officer for that station that we know has been moved, to make sure that that's up and available on the day to try and minimise that disruption if possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask the list of the approved authorisation? Will there be that going on the leaflet that's going in with the council tax? Would that be a good idea?
So you mean in terms of the approved ID?
Yeah, authorisation.
Unfortunately, there isn't space for all of that to go on there. We are putting more detail in some of the other information that's going out, but yeah, not on the main leaflet that's gone out, because that's already had to go to print, unfortunately, because of the timescales involved in that one. But yeah, we will definitely be making more of those available. But yeah, if people are in any doubt at all, then my advice is to go and do the VAC or come and see our customer services team, and they'll talk you through the process of applying for one if you haven't got the right form. We're perfectly happy to talk to people. We've had a number already who have had anomalies, like they've got married but they haven't changed their passport and driver's license yet because they're not using them, and those sorts of things, and what they do in those circumstances. We're more than happy to give that advice in advance, just to give people the reassurance.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, that's all right.
Yeah.
And just following off the point that's made, are you going to be using QR codes as a way? So if people want to know the ID, I'd urge that could be, you know, on the leaflets and posters, so that people can click on the QR to go click through to the website and actually get the list of ID. Is that something that's going to be done?
Actually, it was something we've had a project meeting today, and it was one of the things that one of the team raised. So yeah, we are getting some QR codes that we'll be including on that documentation wherever we can, and we'll be doing videos as well. We're also in contact and discussion with people about getting BSL versions done and Braille as well, and part of the discussions I'll be having with some of our community groups about different ways of getting the information across to people with additional needs.
And there's just sort of one of, going back to what Di was saying about the schools, just want to reinforce that point. I think it's just really important to avoid using schools. So just two questions on it. Where it says potential move, I'm sort of taking that is going to happen, that move will happen. And are there any schools on here? Could you just identify the schools which will definitely be used?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think all the schools, apologies, it's coming back up again because for some reason it's closed itself down. Let's open it up again.
Schools are shown in green.
So they're all highlighted in green, the ones that are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have put those proposals in, so we're actively in discussions with those alternative location to move them. So just working our way down. So Boney Hay, we've established that we can't because the club isn't available. Chadsmead, we're looking to use the Scout Hut instead of that, and Chase Terrace Primary, as Councillor Evans has pointed out, we're just using the nursery block, so we're not disrupting the whole of the school. And wherever possible, if schools want us to go out and do a site visit and assess a separate location, as long as it's accessible from the public highway and we're not breaching their safeguarding procedures, then we're more than happy to accommodate a specific location within the school so they can continue to operate, and we have been sending those messages out. Just further down then, St Joseph and Teresa, we're moving to the Burntwood Leisure Centre, and Charnwood, we're looking to move to the social club. Then the other ones, unfortunately, Highfields and Ridgeway, there just aren't alternatives in those locations that we can utilise. Gentleshore, we have asked to move that to the Christchurch Chapel, but I don't think we've had confirmation of that from those, so we may be stuck with Gentleshore, unfortunately, but we're in negotiations to try everything we can to find an alternative to that. St James, I think we've sorted. St Michael's, yes, we're using the council house here, so the chief executive and returning officers confirmed that we'll use this as an alternate location to that. It's a little bit out of the way, but I think people will understand the reasons for that, and rather than disrupting the schools again. Then the St Michael's is coming here. Scotch Orchard, the football club, I don't know if they've confirmed yet, but I think we've been actively discussing them. And Spring Hill, I think unfortunately I don't think Grangemore can accommodate us for the whole day. So I think again Spring Hill may be one that we have to continue to disrupt. But again, I'll have a discussion with them if there's a suitable location that we can do. And then Ridgeway and Street Hay, again, those areas unfortunately we don't have an alternative for in the proximity, but I'm happy if members consider there are other locations, then I'm more than happy to look at them.
Right. Any more questions?
In that case, are we all happy to approve the polling stations proposed as Appendix A for the use by the returning officer?
Aye.
Okay, all, thank you very much. Item 5, taxi licensing update. We're back to Christine.
It's the me show, unfortunately, yes, or fortunately for me. So in terms of, I've got two presentations tonight, and apologies that they are presentations and not reports. But you appreciate I'm a relatively newcomer to this portfolio, having picked it up this year, and assistant director of operations. You'll know. It's a relatively new area, so I am finding my feet, but it's very apparent that these two areas, particularly the taxi policy and the street trading policy, are areas we've experienced some issues over the last 12 months, particularly in relation to the recovery from the COVID and the changes in lots of business models as a result of that. So what I'm talking to you about today is about our proposals for bringing forward more change into those areas. And some of the issues that we've had, so that we can have a bit more of an active discussion, and this committee can guide me in terms of how we shape that future policy development, to ensure that we're meeting everybody's needs, because obviously the regulatory functions are making sure that we're protecting those most vulnerable in our society, and balancing the needs of the businesses that need to operate in this space, the people that need to use them, and potentially the impact that it has on everybody else who's in our district. So the first topic today is private hire vehicles and the taxi policy. So I have done a presentation recently to Audit Member Standards on a specific issue around the taxi policy, because they had some concerns about the number of non-Lichfield taxis that were operating that were licensed by other authorities. So I'm just going to talk to you through some of the issues that I've seen since I've taken on the portfolio, and some of the ideas that the team have come up with, and where we would hope to take this in the future. So obviously we recognise that taxi licensing is a vital part of our economy. You know, we are a well-known tourist destination. We have a very active evening and nighttime economy, and there are a number of locations now, because of the far-flung nature of our district, where potentially travel in the evenings in particular is not possible through normal public transport, and people who don't have access to a car are reliant on taxis to get about in those circumstances. So where previously I think a lot of the focus around taxi has been on that visitor economy piece, and people moving around who are being entertained and drinking in the city of an evening, we're also seeing that there's more reliance on taxis from people, because the public transport options just aren't there now, particularly those who are needing transport to and from appointments and hospitals. So the demographic of who's using taxis now has shifted somewhat. So our current policy, we did do a review last March, which was a minor tweak. However, what we've had and what we've seen from the feedback that I've done so far since I've been in office is about how cumbersome some of those processes are. They're still very much administrative in function and very much paper based. We are 93 pages long as it stands as a taxi policy. So with the best will in the world, I as an officer lost the will to read it after page 30. So heaven knows how the taxi drivers actually get on, who this isn't their day-to-day responsibility to read and digest policies. They need probably something a little bit more succinct and a little bit more accessible for them to be able to keep to and be able to understand and work with. So it is very, very detailed, and that's good in terms of being able to give us clarity around how we should respond to certain situations. But what it does mean is that it becomes an inaccessible wall of words for people who aren't used to reading policies of that nature. So from a user perspective, from the taxi driver's perspective, everything is everywhere in the policy. There isn't a clear flow of this is the stuff you need to know before you start, this is the stuff you need to know when you're operating, and these are some of the issues that you need to consider in terms of who you're servicing and how you're meeting the needs of your customers. So making sure that is absolutely clear, because obviously what we want from our taxi policy is to make sure that drivers can comply with it and meet the standards that we're setting, and that the users of the taxis have reassurance and a consistent experience where they know what they're going to be charged, and what they can expect, what they can reasonably expect from as service from their taxi provider. We've also seen an increasing number of drivers who are very concerned about their safety. So it's very much, the policy is very much written in terms of you will do this to ensure the safety of your customers, but there's very little reflection in the policy about what we need to do and what advice we need to give those drivers to keep themselves safe as well, and what recourse they have if there are issues as a result of them carrying out their day-to-day work. We were also seeing a real narrative coming out from the drivers about the cost of living crisis. The taxi rates are set by the policy, the age of the vehicle is determined, the emissions of the vehicle are determined in terms of meeting our air quality standards. But what we're finding now is that as the used car market and the new car market are struggling because of the international chip shortage, and those sorts of delivery times are now in excess of a year for some of them. They're struggling to obtain vehicles that can comply with our requirements given the scope of what we're trying to do. So just a bit of a rethink about how we're framing that, and what is the key driver there, because for me the key driver is about the air quality issues and our climate change commitments, not necessarily whether something is a 2016 plate as opposed to a 2015 plate. So it's just a word of caution in terms of where we pitched some of the parameters that we set in our policy at the moment. So yeah, another theme that's come out is the cost of journeys for customers. What we're finding is that a very high proportion of our drivers don't actually reside within our district. So they are naturally driving in to do work. And if they're private hire vehicles rather than being picked up at the rank, then they're potentially charging for the earlier start or the start point from their home rather than necessarily from the pickup point in Lichfield. So, making sure that customers are aware that for a private licensed vehicle that's being called up, that isn't something that we can stop. They just need to be thinking about, if it's not a taxi they're picking up at a rank, they have to be thinking about, well, what am I going to be charged for the journey when I book it, so that they're not incurring those charges potentially. The availability throughout the day is very variable as well, because obviously not many of these are living locally. They're driving in to do the work, so they're doing work at specific times where they consider the bulk of the activities, and that may be geared around the evening economy or the pickups from the train stations and things like that. So at other times of the day there can be difficulties in obtaining suitable taxis, and we've got specific examples of people who've booked successive taxis and they've not turned up. And equally, unfortunately, some issues where we've had taxis booked by people with additional needs, whether that's a wheelchair user or those travelling with guide dogs, where they've been refused at the point that the driver's seen what they're there to transport, which is very unhelpful. So there are issues that we need to make sure that we're overcoming through the process of getting people licensed and on our books and operating within the city and the district, to ensure that we're getting that consistency of experience for the user. So we want to design into that process the ability for us to have those important conversations with the taxi driver. So rather than leaving it to chance, we do see them for safeguarding training and things like that. So we want to extend that to things like the accessibility. They are written in the 93 pages of conditions, but they're probably at the bottom on a bottom paragraph of page 76 at the moment, so they probably haven't got that far in terms of reading and understanding and digesting what that actually means on a day-to-day basis for them. So it's about making sure that we're giving them the right information up front and face-to-face, so that they know what their responsibilities and their duties are. Wrong button. Operators. So we've not got a huge amount of operators. We've only got about 20, and there are only 2 that are of any size within the district. So actually, in terms of the operators that we license, they're very minimal here. They tend to be very small clusters. We don't have a huge amount of competition. We've got 100 Hackney vehicles that are licensed. So these are the vehicles that you're allowed to call off from the street. They're all white. They're allowed to put on our taxi ranks, but we've only got about 100 of them. So again, on a busy night in the city, that could be used up very, very quickly. So we've got 3 designated ranks, one on the bottom of Ball Street and one at either of the 2 main stations. We don't have a site at Burntwood at the moment. And as I say, over 90% of our taxi drivers don't actually live within the district bounds. They're driving in from Walsall, Wolverhampton and Burton to actually conduct their business in the district. We do have a couple of plate and panel exempt. This is a specific category that we have for people who are perhaps operating a vehicle for hire, but would be under private circumstances. So it may be a business that's commissioning it, perhaps to run around their executive team, or where they don't want to make it, clear that they're actually a taxi that's being used. They want to give the impression that perhaps it's a private driver for those circumstances. So we do have a limited number of those within the city, within the district, sorry. And some of them apparently have got links to celebrities in terms of they have celebrity people that they move around as well in those circumstances, but they haven't disclosed to me yet who they are. So when I get this, perhaps not in a public meeting, but perhaps be able to let you know who that is.
Are they limited to the colour of the vehicle, Christy?
No, they just they don't have to display a plate, but the basis has to be that the booking has to be on the understanding that it is the customer is requesting that it is not a visibly active taxi. So it may be for something like, if you want to book a private vehicle, perhaps to take you to the airport, rather than necessarily advertise to everybody that you're going in a taxi to go away. You might just want a plain car, in the same way as a business. If you don't want all of your people, if you're arriving to a swanky restaurant for a business lunch, you don't necessarily want the people that you're meeting to know that you've been dropped off by the local taxi firm. They may want you to think that you've got a private chauffeur driven car to give that impression, but that's it's the customer that really drives that and determines that. But they operate in a very specific way to ensure that, because obviously otherwise they would have to display their plate and their license ID.
And that vehicle could be any colour.
I'm not, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I know that one has to be white. I don't think there's any restriction on those. I just think it has to be, a very particular calibre of car to give that impression.
Just come in there. Do you want people to take questions while you're going through?
Yeah, that's fine.
You don't mind?
Yeah, I don't mind. No. But this is entirely, this is about us having a dialogue and you feeding in what your thoughts and concerns are. So I'm more than happy to take the questions as we go.
I like the council that making notes. Whether we do it or on that particular subject, you're happy with that?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. Yes. We can do a roundup at the end as well if there's anything that anybody didn't ask so far. More than happy. So this isn't my subject matter expertise yet, but I'm working on it.
Well, if I could start then with Councillor Ray.
I've got a couple of points, but just point at this stage, the service is dropped off, and I experienced that personally. And I stop when I get a train from Trent Valley. I drive now and I park. I don't want to do that, but I have to. The reliability is not there, and you're saying with people who are disabled and things like that, that's even more concerning. What levers does the council have then to try and make the operators more reliable? What levers are there?
Well, the process, the application process in terms of the steps that they need to go through, as I say, at the moment it's very labour intensive, and there's lots of different stages where they have to come in and then they have to fill out paperwork and then they have to hand it in and then we have to get back to them. So there's lots of different stages. So what we've seen from the benchmarking that we've done with other councils is a lot of them have a very slick process that makes it a lot simpler to apply. Where perhaps you do more work up front in terms of setting the scene and letting them know what they need to do. So it's easier for them to then go through the process rather than keep chopping and changing and coming back with different pieces of information and different parts of the jigsaw. So in terms of the ease of the application, the rates that we're setting, I say the biggest barrier at the moment, the feedback that we've had from the drivers, our biggest barrier is the age requirement of the vehicle, because a lot of them have got some really nice vehicles that will pass the emissions test, but they fail because they're keeping them longer than they would have ordinarily because of the challenges of getting new vehicles, and obviously the resistance, because a lot of people are holding off from buying new vehicles to see how hybrid and electric vehicles develop over the next couple of years, and where they become more accessible to drivers to use, because obviously 2040 is going to be here quite quickly. The years are going through, and everything will need to change by then. So some people are perhaps holding off a bit longer. They're maintaining the vehicles well. If they're passing the emissions test, it's not necessarily a bad thing because they're taking their care, but it's just that hard stop that we can't sort of at the moment move away from, and that is causing a problem. I think people are going to other locations because they can still operate here. What they can't do is they can't sit on our ranks, so they basically have to be booked via one of those operators that operates in our district. But we've seen a massive tail off of that, and those that do run services not just in Lichfield but in neighbouring districts as well. So they run across Walsall and Wolverhampton and Burton and Cannock, so we're pulling in drivers from there rather than necessarily having our own.
Any other questions?
Just with that, you were saying about the application process, you're saying that if it was easier,
Slicker, yeah.
then we might be able to attract more drivers into the area to provide the service.
Yeah. At the moment it's a bit clunky. They have to bring physically stuff in, and if you're coming in, if you lived in the district and you were a resident, it's perhaps not an issue because you can pop in on your way to and from. But if you're perhaps travelling from the other side of Walsall or the other side of Burton, and you've got to bring 2 sets of paperwork in, and then you've got to collect your plate, you might just think, actually, I'll just get licence of Burton and I'll just do the bookings via that rather than, or go on Uber rather than do something that's actually going to service the need here. So that's coming out as a bit of a barrier from the work that we've done so far.
Yeah. I was interested at the beginning of this when you said about the taxis being available for hospital appointments and whatever it was. Does that service apply district-wide to the rural areas as well?
Well, obviously, if it's a booked taxi, then it will go wherever the request comes from, wherever the booking comes from.
Sorry, I don't think I'm making myself clear. It seems that it's coming across to me anyway as being Lichfield centric. And what I'm interested in as much as anything else is with the rural areas not having any transport at all, would this system apply to the rural areas, say my ward, Colton and the Ridways? Would it apply there? Could people from there ask for a taxi to take them, say, to Burton or Derby Hospital?
Yeah, they just have to book.
Yeah, well, where do they get that information from?
Any of the taxi providers that operate within the area and even out of the area. So Uber taxis as well will take bookings wherever they have the drivers available, but it's the availability of the driver that's the real issue. As say, a lot of them focus their attention around the evening economy and the city centre taxi ranks.
The system would work perfectly as far as the rules are concerned. But is there any possibility the information can be put out into the parishes so that residents are aware? There's an awful lot of folks live on their own, and particularly in my ward anyway. So it would be useful if they got the information either via the parish newsletter or whatever it might be, or the parish council. So if you could think about those lines, along those lines, so that people know what's possible. Now, I think that would be very useful. All right, thank you.
Yeah, certainly we can do some. We're intending. I'll cover it off in the next part of the presentation, but we are intending to do some awareness raising campaigns.
Thank you. Yes, it's on the age of vehicle thing. I think it's becoming more and more obvious that the greenest way of going forward with vehicles is to pick one you've got till it doesn't work anymore. I've been doing that for years. It is our policy, and it is different in other areas. Was that issue raised at the discussions that you had? I know this is a presentation, not a discussion. We're not looking at changing policies at this forum, but I think it's something that we do need to look at, because there's many ways of going green. Obviously, the vehicle would need to be well maintained, etc. And I just wondered, the other point is, are we losing a lot to Uber and the like?
I wouldn't say losing is the right thing. I think people use Uber as a platform, and there are users of Uber in the district. Whether or not there's always vehicles available is the issue, because it's not ubiquitous here like it is in some of the other cities. So you have to be quite lucky to be able to get an Uber in proximity for the date and time that you want it, unless you've sort of pre-planned your stuff around that. But yeah, they still have to be licensed within an authority. They just, rather than it being a local operator, they're booked via the platform. So it doesn't impact on the Hackney carriages, because obviously they come via the ranks. But the private hire vehicles, they can equally operate under Uber as they can under any of the operator's license.
Yeah. And the age again is.
Yeah, the age. We have set a very high level of age, so we don't 6 years, and they have to meet a specific standard, which is proving a problem for a lot of our more reliable and more conscientious taxi drivers who've been with us a number of years, who are saying, look, we can't afford to change our car. Even if I ordered one tomorrow, I couldn't get one for 18 months, 2 years to the standard that I want. So how can you help me to keep carrying out my business, basically? So that's the sort of pressure that we're seeing.
For the last probably 8 or more years, most modern vehicles or new vehicles from that point have carried 7 to 10 year guarantees with them. So 8 years, 6 years is nothing for a modern vehicle.
And as I understand it, that age criteria is at 6 years. I thought it was 5 and 7 years, depending on your age. 6 years. Yeah, but it's regardless of type of. So if you buy a new EV, it's still that's got to be adapted, isn't it? That doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Evans, and then perhaps the next question move on.
You want me to put the microphone on, because most people aren't using a microphone anymore.
It does help if you use the microphones, because it allows it to be picked up by the live streaming. So if anyone is watching at home, they'll want to be able to hear you more clearly.
Well, my comment is not intended to be racist in any way at all, but you spoke about the policy being 93 pages long, which is difficult for people to read. Now, we have got taxi drivers who English is their second language. So how do you ensure that these people are understanding the whole of the policy? Because it might be difficult for some people to actually absorb everything that's said, particularly as you have stated that incredibly detailed guidance.
Yeah, it is very difficult to retain, and I think that we've drowned out our policy with words. For me, a smaller, more contained policy that sets out the key principles. Yes, there may be supplementary guidance that you would want to refer to as an officer, perhaps to get consistency. But in terms of what you would want to give to the drivers as a meaningful navigation tool to help them understand their responsibilities and their duties and the conditions of their license, then yeah, we do need to do some work in making that a much simpler and straightforward process. Not to diminish, we've got some very conscientious and very good drivers who do take it all on board, but not everybody can, unfortunately. As you say, there are issues with some people in terms of what they can absorb, and it doesn't help that it has been developed over time, so it doesn't have that narrative quality to it. It's very much, we need to add that paragraph on about that because that's a new requirement, and it just gets lumped on the end of the policy rather than integrated as something that would logically follow. So it does need a refresh and a relook at.
Thank you. It says on the last slide, 90% of the drivers come in from outside the area. Now, are they registered with LDC?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
So in order to operate on our taxi license, on our taxi ranks, and with the operators that are registered here, they have to be registered.
Yeah, that's
here.
what I know. That's what it's always been. I just wondered if that was different.
Yeah.
And are there any?
But they don't have to live here. They just have to be registered here to operate.
Are there any checks made on cars that are parked here where they're picking up people? I mean, do people go out still and check? They used to a few years ago.
Yeah, we don't have a dedicated resource to do that. It's part of our environmental protection team, so it's one of the duties that they do. So we do spot checks, and they do go out into the city in the evening and carry out those checks either visually or through mystery customer. So we may ask somebody to undertake a taxi booking and see what happens, and whether or not they're complying with all of the requirements. One of the things that we're looking to do this year, in conjunction with the police and the community safety partnership, is to do a campaign in the summertime around safe use of taxis and raising awareness about, simple things like if you are booking a private hire taxi, make sure you get a quote for your travel, so you're not incurring the extra costs of them going to and from another location. Making sure that you're checking ID badges so that you know that the person who is registered to drive that vehicle is a registered taxi for hire, and that the plates are all in date and still active and are relevant for this authority. So simple things that hopefully will help to keep people safe. But we do have a dedicated taxi licensing inquiry line, so if anybody does have issues, that's the best way to report it, and one of the environmental protection team will follow up that with an investigation. We've already done 2 or 3 unfortunately this year around issues that have been raised by various customers, so we are keen to make sure that we tackle issues where we find them.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So this campaign, this is just an example because you can see it's not us, it's Bassett Law, but this is part of the campaign that we'll be doing in the summer to raise awareness amongst our customer base. We'll also probably be doing something similar in the eateries and things in the town in the run up to Christmas, just to make sure people are aware of what they should be doing to keep themselves safe in terms of booking taxis and hailing them down on the street from the taxi ranks.
Can I just say, I hope you get the email address correct. The DC is missing at the end of the tree.
Oh gosh, yes it is. Well spotted. I'll get that corrected before I circulate that. So just in terms of what we're doing, so we're currently about to start a taxi consultation, just in terms of getting more of that feedback from the user base. As at the moment, what we've had is anecdotal, just in terms of what the team have fed back to me, what the people that I've already spoken to. So I'd like to take that to the next level, to make sure that we are getting a far and wide and open that up to the general public as well, in terms of their experience from using taxis or not being able to use them at key locations and times. Making sure that we are raising that awareness of taxi users so that people understand how and when they should be using, and the fact that we do have a number that come in to the district. So just to make sure that when you're booking them, you're being aware of what you're paying for. That we look to do the revisions to the application process to make it slicker, so that it's being responsive to the business needs, because we have to view these, yes they're taxi drivers, but they're running a business. Their business is taking our residents and our visitors to and from where they need to within the district. So we need to support their business model and recognise the changes and the challenges that they're experiencing at the moment. That we develop a robust policy, we revise it, slim it down quite considerably to make sure that we're focusing on the key priority areas, perhaps supplementing it with some guidance that officers can use to refer to, but actually making the process a lot more simpler for those taxi drivers to understand their needs and requirements. And then collaborate and continue to work with our key partners to make sure that we continue to review that. And one of the things I'm keen for in this role is to make sure that we develop that relationship with the operator level as well, as you say, to try and challenge some of those issues that we find, to make sure that there is that steady flow and that supply of taxis that are, taking seriously their climate change and the environmental impact of their business, but also recognising that they are potentially, servicing some of our most vulnerable customers, whether that's through their own acts of what they've imbibed on the evening out in the city, or whether they're taking them to and from their medical appointments, and the recognition that they form part of that support that we give to our residents. Okay, so there are any more questions?
Yes, Councillor Ingrid wanted a question.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm just thinking about long term. If this council is debating and holding a consultation about cars not being allowed into the city centre. I know my friends and I, like our friends, we use that taxi rank when we go for restaurants and things like that, and it's right outside. As you pointed out, what's going to happen if the council decide to rule that no traffic will be allowed into the city centre? Where will this taxi rank be? You don't know.
No, that's not something we would have to look at a location that is accessible and suitable to be able to get the traffic. We would need to provide one, but where that would be would depend on what the plan is in terms of how far reaching the pedestrianisation takes and what time it takes effect from, because that's the thing at the moment, because the taxi rank operates, particularly in the city centre, at specific times. It's not 24 hours. So, you know, we'd have to look at those limitations as well, and it may be that there may need to be more than one, depending on how that pedestrianisation routes and where the flow of traffic will need to come from and to.
Thank you.
Any other questions,
Yeah.
Councillor Ray?
Yeah. So, just two other
points. Payment. Essentially, they're cashless. It's cash, isn't it? The app doesn't work well, certainly with some of the operators. But again, I think about overall modernising the service, making it more user friendly, to have a requirement for to be able to pay cashless in a taxi in this area. The other thing, which is a bigger picture, and I've raised this before in full council and in the media, is whether we, as a council, we should have an ambitious policy
to say by a certain date.
Like a certain date in London is 2030. All taxis registered by this council need to be hybrid or EV. And I appreciate there's a cost for the operators there, but if we get the overall package right regarding fares, application process, and I'd like to see that this council would be ambitious and be able to and forward thinking in setting a policy like that, which I think would be well received. I appreciate that has to be all subject to consultation, but I think that needs to be part of the agenda as well, because that's where it's going, and let's be ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve.
Can I just come in there? I don't think that's something we can discuss and sort out here. It's something that we'll have to get. Oh yeah, but it would have to go back to council. That not to
The reason I'm raising it is Christie's here.
Yes.
It's going to be involved in that consultation. I think it's very important that it's a big issue. It's part of the consultation rather than we're just looking at the detail. We're looking at the big picture as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something that I'm looking at as well from the other side of the portfolio in terms of managing the car parks and the EV charging that we have available in the city centre and other locations. So it is a big issue, and it's part of the 2050 district strategy consultation that's already been done. So yeah, I'm more than happy to include questions and feedback on that. As I say, some of the challenges that they're facing at the moment, I don't think the businesses would be very receptive to it. But as you say, with the right package around it, it could be, and it'd be useful to understand what that would look like.
Councillor Edith.
Just a quick one, going off Councillor Ray's. I'm not against there being taxis that have better facilities for cards, but I wouldn't want cashless taxis, because to use cards machines, you've got to pay. So, and from Burntwood, I don't know if it's how we've got a lot of places that are like, actually, we want the cash rather than it's going back towards cash. I'm just saying, you know, because you ain't cashless. I'm all for having proper facilities, but obviously, if they want cash, it just saves them money on paying fees and things as well.
So no more questions? Christy, you've covered everything there. So we wait for you to come back next week with the update. Thank you very much for that.
I'm very fortunate, thank you, that today we've had a new officer start, the enforcement and regulation officer. It was his first day, so I didn't think it was right to hold on to him till 8 o'clock for a committee, but he'll definitely come to the next one and chat to you all about how he's going to bring these changes around, and getting a licensing officer in to actually do all this consultation work and take this forward is going to be one of his primary tasks. So hopefully we'll see things moving quite quickly.
Thank you for that. Well, item 6, events and street trading update. Would you believe? It's back to Christine.
It's the me show, yes. So members obviously have asked for us to update on where we are. We've done quite a lot of work over the last couple of years on street trading on the back of the events policy that the council has adopted to try and encourage a much broader and more diverse range of events into the district and to ensure that we're regulating them effectively. So I thought it was opportune again. I think it's fair to say we've had a bit of a mixed bag. It's worked on some fronts in terms of we've got some exciting new events that are potentially coming through this year that we wouldn't have seen without the direction of the events policy. But there are some niggling issues that we have with the street trading, just in relation to how business models have moved for a lot of event organisers and the bricks and mortar businesses as a result of COVID recovery. So today I'm just going to again talk to you about what some of those challenges are and what we plan to do to bring about some change with the event, and to have a bit of a discussion really about what some of the options are, because I think it's time as a committee we've done lots of tweaks to the street trading policy, but we haven't stood back and thought, well, is there a bigger picture here that we have to step back and have a think about approaching it in a different way? So hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion around that as I present some of the options. So the objectives of our street trading policy is obviously to make sure that we regulate street trading, that we accommodate a wide range of local environments in the district, that we create an environment that complements the premises based in trading. We don't want to do anything that undermines those businesses that are already within the district, and ensure that those activities are sensitive to residents and don't cause nuisance or annoyance, that we're ensuring public health and public protection and safety through any trading that takes place in these locations, and that they complement and support the other policies, specifically the events and festivals policy, creating that ambience for a district and the local economy and the character of the area. So in terms of some of the options that we have, obviously the policy as it stands at the moment it has been developed over time. There are a couple of options that we could consider. And these I know have been flagged to members in the past, but I think it's worth just revisiting what we could have and what that could mean. So the first is the complete unadoption of the relevant legislation for street trading. Street trading is optional for us. We don't necessarily need to do a policy in the way that we do it. We can have no control and we can let things happen as they would naturally. It's not something I would personally recommend, and I'm sure that there's a number of operators who would take full advantages of that. But that is an option that we could explore if the committee wanted us to have a look at that. Basically, it would allow any trader to trade anywhere where the permission is not required. So any public space could be available, and we could end up having trading activity all over the place where perhaps we wouldn't want to direct it, which wouldn't really be in line with our aims. So we could also look at options to exclude some streets that are currently consented, so that we don't have to go through a street trading process to that. So where there are locations where we know that people perhaps would want to stop and buy something, or have a refreshment stand or a food store or a trading opportunity. So there are key locations that we could consider and deregulate so that they aren't subject to these regulations. But again, in terms of what we're trying to do in creating something that supports local business that's already there in the bricks and mortar buildings, and making sure that we're providing an ambience, it doesn't necessarily give us the levers to ensure that that's going ahead. So again, another option, but not necessarily one that would be an officer recommendation. So specific sites, thinking about some of the specific sites that where this is an extension of the primary exclusion, is about perhaps taking it away from just the council owned land and the streets that are currently consented. So again, we'd have to follow a legal process. We'd have to go through formal consultation for this and make sure that the orders are set in the appropriate way. But it would make sure that the landowners in the district would see us perhaps acting differently on our own land and those key areas that are perhaps frequently used, and create a two-tier approach to the street trading policy. It could go a step further by looking at key partners such as people like the cathedral and the city council, and the town and parish councils, and some other of the key locations where we know activity takes place, and removing those areas of regulation. But again, it could bring with that large amounts of risks, and again be perceived by people who are perhaps wanting to bring forward new and different events from perhaps the ones that we've traditionally already done, that there is a two-tier approach and not necessarily parity in terms of how we're presenting the obligations that they need to comply with. So the last option in terms of the alternatives that we have to the current situation is what I'm terming as self-regulation. So this is where we shift the current focus of the street trading policy from us administering and controlling everything before it happens to actually giving more responsibility and control to the event organisers, but the focus of our activity moving from administrating those applications to actually enforcing and compliance checking those applications. Because at the moment we're spending a lot of time looking through bits of paper, making sure they've got the right bits of paper, but it means that we don't have a huge amount of resources to go out and about on the day or in the run up to ensure that what they've told us on bits of paper is actually what's happening on the day. And it's whether that's the right shift and the right balance that we feel we want to have in this current climate. So street trading consent could be given to event organisers, so we don't go to the individual trading levels. It means we couldn't levy the individual fees, but we could increase the street trading costs overall. So that's inclusive, but again, it would free up some of the capacity and officer time for us to, instead of checking everything, is actually doing those checks on the day and making sure that the event management plan and all of the activity and the licensing activity is being done as said on the day. Another option is that has been discussed, I think, at this committee previously, was about the public liability insurance and the requirement, because this seems to be the thing that most people struggle with. A lot of them have some form of PLI and insurance cover in place, but it doesn't necessarily meet the £5 million threshold that we've set within the policy. So again, it's about options for whether or not we could offset some of that. From an insurance perspective, I know it's very, very difficult, but some event organisers do offer it to people who come under their purview in terms of how they're operating and delivering their event. So again, it's something else we can consider in the review of the policy, whether or not it's something we will tolerate and want to see happen. So those are some of the options in terms of how we could shape the future of the policy. I think what's quite clear at the moment is the business models of a lot of local businesses have changed, and the reliance on events and temporary events and temporary food provision as well is a lot more than it ever was, because a lot of businesses now just can't sustain their own kitchens and their own offer in terms of food. So we have seen a big shift, so we do need to take that into account in redeveloping the policy. But I'm happy to take any questions on those options and any feelings or any other options that you want me to consider when we're doing this review.
Questions now?
Right, I've all got the hands up. Councillor Ennis, please.
Just the last one about the public liability insurance, that's been, I don't know if Nine and Councillor Evans will agree, it's been an issue that we've had in Burntwood on little events like our Christmas events and things, where you want local people to come and do our Christmas events, but when this has come up, it's been an absolute, well, we can't afford to do that, I can't find insurance for that. So maybe for things that are kind of little to towns and parishes, that's one thing we might have to look at, that maybe they don't have to have something that high. They've got to have something, but not that high. Whereas if you've got bigger things, obviously when you've got the bower or when we've got the weights now, that's somewhere you might look at higher ones. It's just a massive issue that we've noticed. When we've done little things in our area.
Around to councillor Salter, please.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, on that subject, personally, I feel 5 million is way too low these days, to be honest. I know when I was in full-time employment in my previous life, as it were, I was carrying £8 million then, and many venues ask for at least 10 now. I think our chairman would agree on that. Something to be looked in. And to be honest, the difference in the policy cost pro rata to the amount you're covered for, it is negligible. It's taking it out to start with is the initial cost. The various thresholds don't actually increase the policy cost all that much. On the self-regulation, I can see where you're coming from in respect of the work involved in doing all the pre-checks. My concern would be that many of the events are sort of all sorts of things happening all on one day because of what the day is, a jubilee or a coronation, of course, we've got coming around very shortly. I would have thought it was much easier to tick all the boxes over the months prior to that event rather than a whole lot of people trying to get around 50 or 60 events on one day.
If I can come back on that one, yeah, the principle of that is not necessarily that you're doing a full audit of everything. The responsibility to gather that information would still sit with the event organizer. So the event organizer would have to do those checks and provide that information to us. It just means that we're not managing all of that and giving the interaction to all of the traders, because the event organizer would need to liaise with all of those traders anyway to book them in for the event. So in effect, what we're finding is the traders are having to have 2 levels of contact, once with us and once with the event organizer. And what they're telling us isn't always what they're necessarily telling the event organizer, and that's where a lot of our time is spent or wasted, I would say, because we're chasing things that the event organizer is convinced that they've got, that they actually haven't when we look at the paperwork. So actually giving them that control, because the event organizer has a vested interest in making sure that their event happens and that they can get the fee from the trader that's actually due to attend them, whereas the trader has no incentive for us, because as far as they're concerned, they're booked in on that event. And some of them will take the chance, and we've had that where we've actually had to turn up on the day and say to somebody, well, you haven't provided necessary paperwork, I'm sorry, you do have to pack up and go home. So there are those circumstances, but it's about, as you say, it's about the resource that does that. And as you've pointed out, there are key dates in the year where there are multiple events taking place. And if you can imagine, 140 stall holders on 3 events in the last 2 weeks leading up to that event, when everything should be done, the team are just inundated trying to chase their tails getting those stuff. So actually putting that out means that we don't have that bottleneck where we're preventing potentially that from happening, because we're the one that's gathering all of that information together, whereas the event organizer can do that. And the control for us is that the event organizer will still have to give us that information, but we wouldn't necessarily 100% check it. We would check perhaps 10 of those. If we find that any of them aren't compliant, then the next time that event comes around, there's a question as to whether or not that event should be happening at all. So it becomes that sort of management approach.
And we maybe have sanctions on non-compliance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could just come in there before I come round the room. I personally wouldn't want to think we've got to leave it to the event organizer to do. Having spent 50 years in the business, I wouldn't, because I've worked with lots of them, and I could spend all night telling you things that they should do and they don't do. And I would be very concerned if we had an incident and then we found out that the stall holder was not insured, it would come back to this council. So, and the other thing I've quickly say, at the moment it works. What we're doing works. So if we can improve on it, if we can obviously help the officers with the work, I'm all for that. But relying on event organizer, you've got different people and no, not for me, but we'll carry on. Oh, yes.
Can I just ask, what's, this would in some way be the future? What is happening to the existing legislation? Because at the moment, well, following on from what the chairman has just said, there are a lot of rules and regulations that already exist. Licenses and public liability insurance and things like that. Is that going to be pushed to one side and this come in its place? Or are we going to merge, or would it be for a future committee to decide what would be reasonable and what would not be reasonable?
Yeah, this is just to make sure that the committee have considered all of the options in terms of how we want to develop the policy going forward. As I said, the business model over the last 2 years for most of the bricks and mortar businesses has changed significantly, and a lot of them have shifted to temporary events and issues that impact on street trading to support their day-to-day business. So we've seen a big shift in that, and we do need to revise the policy to reflect and support those businesses with those challenges that they're facing, but it's an opportunity to just consider, stop and consider, is, you know, are we happy with where we are and the decisions that we've made and what we've discounted so far before we go ahead with that review, because the scope of that review is entirely in our power at the moment. As I say, we have the option to not have anything. I wouldn't recommend it, but yeah, there is no requirement for us to regulate in the way that we do. So it's about being clear on what our aims are. And I think from this discussion today, I think what we need to do with this policy is set out the specific aims as we've done on the taxi policy, in terms of making it clear what it is that we're there to do.
May I come back to you? In the past, over a fair period of time, we've had so many problems brought to this committee for a solution. And I can't, having gone through that, I can't personally see that just removing everything is naturally going to work, because, as I say, we've had so many instances where there's been arguments, discussions, upsets, all sorts of things have happened. So I side with the chairman in as much as, yes, it's lovely if everybody followed the rules. Unfortunately, they don't.
Councillor Evans.
Yeah, I can swing along with this. My husband and his Rotary Club, as you well know, run Cars in the Park, and last year there was an awful lot of rush towards the end to get these people up and get their papers checked, and it was, I live with this man and I know what it goes, you know, when the doors start slamming and all that sort of thing. And I would like to ask you for some sympathy when these forms come back to you to check for all their insurance and all their liability claims are all in order. You do it with a nice smiling face, and also tell them that when the deadline is, Chrissy, because it's sometimes not knowing that there's a deadline, but now we've got a new officer coming in, which is makes it lighter work. But it is essential that we have these people with the proper papers and the liability for safety reasons. So, you know, we knew it would be advisable when these notices are sent out to people like St Chad Rotary, that they can take this on board, and they've got this deadline that they can issue with their people that are coming to Cars in the Park, with a notice to say there's deadline.
Thank you.
Councillor Cross, then I come to Councillor Chetland.
Thank you, Chair. Christy, is the public liability, is that payable by the event organiser or the individual stall holders?
They both have to have some cover in place. The event organiser needs it, as well as the individual store holder. The PLI tends to be related to the activity that they're carrying out. So everybody who has an insurance should have in place, a reasonable risk assessment of what their liabilities are and how they're going to mitigate to control that in order for them to be appropriately insured. Most insurers will insist that they have that set out in writing before they will actually consider undertaking that insurance and taking on that liability.
Right, thank you. That's good, because I'm going back to Councillor Ennis's concern here, which I share, that if you've got a small event, then 5 million public liability could be quite a punishing fee or a policy figure for them. And whereas if you've got a bigger event, say like something in the park, 10 million is nothing. So is it possible to have like a sliding scale, depending on the size of the event? Because the bigger the event's going to attract more people, and more people, the bigger the risk.
I mean, some examples that we've had recently is an example where a storeholder, had a weighted part to their marquee. Somebody tripped over and actually broke their neck. And they were quadriplegic. So you associate a young person with that sort of injury and think about the lifetime cost of that. As Councillor Salters pointed out, £1 million doesn't even touch the sides of the costs of support for that individual to have a reasonable quality of life going forward. So we do have to be very cautious about setting these levels to make sure that they are fit for purpose, and they will give assurance to somebody who is unfortunate enough to be a victim of an incident or accident as a result of that activity, that they have appropriate cover in place to give them the quality of life that they will need thereafter. So that's an extreme example. There are a number of options, particularly in relation to charitable enterprises, and most sort of like things like PTFAs and things like that. They have an association that, provided you cover their general risk assessments and follow their guidance and advice, you can get suitable levels of cover that are covered on their group cover. There are other exemptions and groups that will operate in that way, where people can access that. So again, if people aren't sure, provided they do it in enough time, we can give advice and support on that in the long term, to say to people, if you join this for, it's pennies, sometimes it's like £5 joining fee, and you get access to all of their guidance, their templates, their risk assessments, and their insurance liability cover as well, from that group perspective. So there are options that are available, but we do have to make sure that if there is a need for that insurance to be in place, that it's appropriate to cover the circumstances that may arise.
Councillor Chetland, I'll come back to.
One's very short. I'll just agree with Councillor Yates. The concept of there's no incentive for an event organiser to make sure everything runs right. If it's in a similar way, then just watch the pitch through. Is there a possibility of licensing the event organiser so that we can get rid of them?
Well, I think that's the issue, isn't it? Is at the moment we're harrying all the strain and the issue of getting people through and saying no. And the event organiser, yes, their incentive is to take the money, but if we give them the responsibility to ensure that everything's run smoothly, if they don't comply with that, then the next time they want to run the event, we say no.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like that concept, but I think you'd soon run out of people who are prepared to take one on. Sorry, the last one is that even on?
Yeah. The last one is just, I think it's vital when we do this that we protect the businesses that pay their rates and pay the bricks and mortar on a daily basis, rather than the temporary trader that comes in, makes benefit of the busiest days and pitches themselves in front of a business that almost does the same thing. And that's why we need to regulate this business. I'm all in favour of it certainly being easier, and if we can reduce the workloads, that would be absolutely brilliant. Those are the only 2 points that I want to make.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you. Yeah, back on the public liability, the size of the event doesn't matter. I mean, you did give an extreme example there, but that could happen either as a fate in a cul-de-sac or at Glastonbury, so it must be covered. What I would perhaps suggest is for those who are involved in small events, public events work with the parish council as much as you can, not necessarily get the parish council to run it, although they can, of course. But if you work with them properly, then you can get an extension to insurances. Parish council have a blanket public liability policy anyway, and an event could be added to that at fairly low cost.
I mean, sorry, particularly in relation to the fact we've got supposed street parties being pushed all the way through the coronation weekend. Public liability, I mean, we've run street parties in our area before, but we don't say any insurance for it. You've scared me now. Okay.
It is scary.
Someone else can organise it, I'll go.
Have a word with the police. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? No, Councillor Ray.
Yeah, firstly with Councillor Checkler, I think I totally agree with the point he's making about we need to look after the interests of our business ratepayers. They're absolutely crucial to the financial viability of this council. And I think part of it's the layout, and part of it is an idea I put forward before. If you've got a bricks and mortar trader who wants to trade in the street, whether we waive the fee so they can do that. So, but we have to look after their interests. Just going back to the PLI, it's an interesting debate. So I saw two. I'm conscious of the costs for the council in administrating this 140 stalls. Wow. Is there insurance at the individual trader level that the promoter can take out? I don't know whether. And also the other question was with something like a Glastonbury or a Goose Fair in Nottingham, how does that work? Does the Nottingham City Council, then where there must be 1,000 stalls? I don't know. Is there an alternative way that it happens at other authorities?
Yeah, they each have a policy, and some of them do go down that route where they have trusted event organisers who do their own checks and balances, and they just do the compliance checks from that perspective. Some of them have more sophisticated systems where they can sort of do pre-approvals and have renewal reminders and things like that for people whose insurance is coming up or their food safety inspection needs renewing. So we don't have that level of automation yet. That's something that I'm hoping to look at in the future, but we're a couple of years away from that. So it's about finding something that will work and balance all of those needs. But yeah, they do have those approaches, and yes, this is the sort of work that goes on day in, day out. And an event like the Birmingham festivals and the Nottingham Goose Fair, this is all happening in the background, but obviously on a slightly different scale. About 200 stalls is probably the most that we've ever done, and that is a month's work for several officers in terms of chasing all those through, because unfortunately, people don't necessarily check the date of their compliance. They don't necessarily book their event booking space under the same trading name as their insurance is listed at, and all these wonderful things that end up meaning that you're having several phone calls and discussions and chasing through revisions to paperwork right up until the wire. But yeah, there are things that we can do, but it's about finding the balance to strike. And a banded approach is another one as well, depending on the scale of the event, is about the level that you will go to. So those are some options as well that we're seeing coming through in the best practice that we can bring forward as well in the future discussions. So it's useful to just understand where the committee's thinking is and what you'd like to see in the future.
Well, thank you for that, Christy.
I do have another couple of slides just on an emerging thing that I think the committee should be aware of, if you'll indulge me, Chair, if that's okay. Sorry, it's just another 5 minutes, but hopefully you'll find this useful. This is something that's been launched today by the government called Martin's Law. You may have heard about this from national releases that have taken place since December when it was formally announced. We're yet waiting for the timeline of when this will take effect, because they're waiting for time within the House for the bill to be read and then for the consultation to take place. For it to become enacted, if indeed it is. But I thought it was useful on the back of this to make sure that members are aware that this is coming down the line and could potentially have a big impact on certainly our own operation in terms of the district council house and many of the businesses within our district and the events that we operate as well. So it's something called Martin's Law, and it relates to Martin Hett, who was one of the unfortunate people who died in the Manchester Arena attack in 2017. It was formerly called the Protect Duty, and some of you may have been aware that this has been something that's been growing over the last couple of years. They were hoping to get it launched before now, but obviously things have been somewhat distracted at the national level over the last few months. So I have included the fact sheet that was launched in December that explains some of the details I'm going to just quickly go through this evening. So essentially, what they're proposing is that there will be 2 tiers of operations. So one that applies to any venue that has the capacity of up to 100 people, which obviously over 100 people, sorry, which could include, key locations within the city, things like the Guildhall, our own council chamber. That's actually rated for 120. I know it seats 47 plus visitors, but actually in terms of the capacity of the venue, it's 120. And then anything that's over 800. So this would be anything that's marked by a physical boundary. So, for instance, when we have events in the Beacon Park where there is, a fenced area, then it would apply to those. And the measures. Light touch for 100, just in terms of having a plan, having people suitably trained, and then for the higher level, potentially having more thorough security plan, physical intervention measures, and CCTV and monitoring in place. So some of the requirements of this legislation, as it's currently proposed, are quite stringent and could increase costs considerably for some of the bigger events that happen within the district. So it's got to place the requirements on those certain locations to manage and consider the threat of terrorism and have proportionate mitigation measures in place. It will ensure that everybody's prepared to respond, and hopefully will give people who are attending those events better protection. So security systems, staff training and processes are all going to be quite fundamental to that. So it's another layer of requirements that event operators and indeed operators of all businesses are going to have to consider. At the moment, the current threat level to us as a nation stands at substantial. So that's updated on the Protect website. If you go on there, that changes depending on what the level is. It's been between moderate and substantial for the last 12 months. So again, at the moment, it's currently considered substantial. So there is an attack is likely, but not highly likely at the moment, fortunately. So again, the qualifying activities are things that are entertainment, leisure, retail, food, drink, museums, galleries, sports ground, public areas of local and central government, so including our own business and the Guildhall in particular. I'm not sure that there's a venue big enough in Burntwood for 100 plus.
A lot of the
Other than the rugby clubs and
rugby club,
yeah, the memorial, yeah, some Matthews, yeah. So again, those will all come into scope. Yeah,
there's a few.
Yeah.
Not no.
Business productions, obviously we've got Drayton Manor within our area as well, which would be covered by this. And then temporary events are also covered by it. So anything that has a curtailed entrance, so anything that's ticketed basically would come under scope for this as well. So there are some support that's being developed. So there will be statutory guidance that will be developed over the course of the year, and there will be a regulator. We're not entirely sure how that will operate yet, whether it's a health and safety type person. I would imagine it would need to be at a national level to do this. At the moment, Protect.uk has the best up-to-date advice in terms of the sorts of things we would need to consider. So at the moment it's advice and information, whereas through this legislation it would become regulated activity, so you would have to comply rather than it being best practice and advice to comply. But we are reassured that tools and products, including lots of templates, risk assessments and methodologies and any other products that they're recommending, will be available through that platform as well for us and anybody to use. The potential sanctions are quite sobering. So enforcement undertakings are liable, and then notices for particularly the first tier one. So anything that's over 100 but under 800 would be subject to notice. Not yet clear what the next stage beyond an enforcement notice would be. That's something that will no doubt come out. But the variable monetary penalties for the higher level, the higher tier, they're essentially unlimited, and they could be up to 5% of worldwide turnover. So if you can imagine some of the big retail parks and shopping centres where they have got a multinational presence, that could be a very big incentive for them to make sure that they're complying with every letter of this regulation. There are potentially criminal sanctions as well associated with this, obviously, because of the severity of the risk that we may face. So for us, the issues, obviously, there's going to be a big impact on licensing, particularly for temporary events, and obviously our own buildings and infrastructure and anything that comes into scope for these is going to have a watching brief on this. We do have a safety advisory group that's attached to the civil contingencies unit. So this is an advisory group that complies of us and key partners, including the police, that advises on events and gives advice and guidance on keeping them health and safety compliant. And this is another factor. So we have incorporated best practice into that where this is considered as part of that practice, but obviously we will shift then into this will be advisory in terms of complying with the law rather than just advice that you should consider. So planning for events and planning for the introduction of this is going to be key. Open events and locations, it's not clear how that ends at the moment. They're talking about a physical boundary. If that does change and it does include the non-bound events, so things like some of the food festivals and things that we have in the city, then we and in particular the Bower, I'm thinking about the Bower Parade especially, there could be, and proms, there could be some severe curtailment that we may have to consider as in response to that. There has to be a person in control in any event that comes into scope for this, and they have the liability and the responsibility to ensure that this legislation is complied with. So again, we may find that some of the volunteer activities that happen, we may struggle to get people who will step up and take on and accept that responsibility, given some of the penalties that could happen. And then at the moment, there's still not any clarity on whether or not there'll be any funding associated with this to help us accommodate any of the costs of giving advice and support and transitioning into these arrangements, whether that's for ourselves or to support any of the businesses that are in scope. So the timeline at the moment, the policy was published in December, so I've included a link on that. The proposal's become a bill at some point in the spring. They haven't defined it yet, but that will then need to go through a round of scrutiny at parliamentary level. The legislation scheduled as time allows, they're hoping for the autumn. But again, that's subject to what else needs to be done from the parliamentary priorities. And if the bill becomes the Act, there will be a need in time. We expect that at some point in 2024, that if it goes through, that it will be enacted, and then we'll have to ensure that all location event organisers will have to comply, and that's everybody who's over 100 capacity within the district, as well as any temporary events. So a bit sobering, but I thought it was important that members understood this is coming down the line and will have a big impact on us, particularly in relation to events.
Thank you.
Okay, David Salter, Councillor Salter.
Could I ask, Christy, would you be able to send out a PDF of your presentation, particularly this last part? I'd like to circulate that around my colleagues for the Glastonbury event.
Yes, we've obviously had that, and that literally has been the brief today from central government. So
It's something we've got to look at. It's a 3,000 ticket event, so anything closed.
Yeah, in 2024,
it will be up and running.
It's just best practice and guidance
that you need to follow, but
we need to be on top of that. Thank you.
I could tell you can get insurance for terrorism. Probably, no, seriously.
Yeah.
I have a tenant who's got it. That's something else everyone going to have to be looking at. But right, I think that covers that. The only other thing was work programme. I don't think we've got anything on.
No, the only change to the work programme is that we've changed the date of the next meeting to bring it in line with the new calendar of meetings. So it's now in June rather than May. But obviously that was always going to be after the local elections in the next municipal year. So the only other thing is to say a big thank you to the committee for all your work. It's very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you all of you. Oh, just one moment. Yeah.
I am assured by the chairman, and this has just been confirmed by Will, this is the last meeting of this committee before the election, so therefore it will be a new committee, I assume, after me. So can I be, on behalf of all of us, thank the chairman,
Absolutely.
and can I thank the officers and Will, for being so helpful, so supportive. Thank you, chairman.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
She jumped the gun. I thought that I could do that. I'm leaving as well, as you all know. I shan't be standing again. So it's a pleasure to have this committee. It's more direct than any other committee I sit on at the district, because it's something we all use, it's something we all do. So thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you. I know you're only new on the job for this, Christie, but we do appreciate it. Thank you very much, Will.
I think we also need to recognise the licensing hearings that take place, because they are not simple, and they involve a lot of work as well. So that's important to recognise that this committee is just not a committee meeting around here, it's all the other things that go on as well.
A lot goes on, but my thanks to all of you for making it always a pleasure to chair these meetings, and we see what brings at the next meeting. We will indeed. So I'll close this meeting at 7:45, I believe, and thank you. And we wait for Will to become an officer.
That's fine.